Now, with an increasing number of well-known organizations locally and globally appointing female CEOs, the trend towards women in leadership positions seems to be on the rise, as there are more women running Fortune 500 businesses today than any point in the world history. As the world becomes increasingly aware of the important role women play in the business world, the private sector in Nigeria is gradually closing the gap in gender equality, as many women are now being appointed in senior management positions, challenging gender stereotypes in male-dominated professions. While women have contributed positively to the progress and growth of the nation through their professional achievements, there is need for more advocacies for women to be given more recognition and, of course, in the corporate world as they meaningfully contribute their quota, driving economic growth. Well, joining me via Zoom now to look at the role women play in advancing businesses and, of course, economic growth. We're still staying in line with the celebration of the International Women's Day. She's a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Esiri Agbeyi. Thank you so much for your time. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you as well.
Well, happy International Women's Day. Let me start that way because I think you still have the whole week. So let's continue to wish you all of the best.
I wish you the same as well, Tolu. It's not just to us. It's also to those who are our allies.
That's
I wish you the same.
All right, then. Great stuff. Well, let's start with the theme. Well, digital innovation, technology for gender equality. My first discussion was around startups, and it also stays with the digital space. Everything seems to roll around technology at the moment. Why this theme to you? What do you think is the truth? Why did you choose this theme for this year?
So thanks, Solo. I think it's a very important area to focus on, given that a lot of business now, anchors around technology. And it's one of the greatest assets, that businesses, economies need now to progress as you would have it. And one of the things that we're also finding is there's a lot of gap, or a huge gap, in the women present when it comes to STEM-related subjects, sciences, technology, engineering, and whatnot. So very important that we begin to focus on those areas where those gaps exist and start to prefer recommendations on what can change. So the theme for this year is informed by that, and it's also really resounding the message about improving gender, female presence within the tech space. Because once we're able to achieve a position or a status quo where all resources are brought to the table for discussion, then we start to increase also the economic value. So it's a very important theme, and I really commend the UN for driving that narrative.
How or why do you believe that women leadership and collective action can really make a difference? What's this unique thing that makes you think that women in leadership can always make that difference?
So it just goes back to the basics of the fact that the world is made up of different genders. And if you do want to have the best of those who are present within any society, you must have an inclusive approach to operations, to management, and to leadership as well. Most of the time you find that whilst women and men maybe compare side by side at the early stages, whether it be in school or it be in the early years when you start career, you find that as you grow up the ladder, it then starts to taper. And where you then have those kind of taperings, it then means we don't have a full reflection of what society offers us. If we don't have a full reflection of what society offers, there's no way we can get the best and the optimal value from society. Because while on the one hand, you have a population that's speaking 50-50, you only have a leadership that's not being representative of that full population. So you miss out a great deal on those. And when we see countries like the Finland who are making progressive efforts, to include women on the table, or even Rwanda as an example. It starts to tell you or give you very convincing reasons why you must have full participation and representation from all of your gender. So it's a very important aspect. It's not like it's something that we think it's a good to have. It's a must have, and it's just important that we continue to emphasize that across all levels of leadership and across all levels of representation.
So you will agree with me that we have this gender gap around STEM, which you mentioned: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. How can we make this more attractive for women to come in? I remember, I'm not that old, but those days in school, you rarely see ladies in engineering department. You see them in the other side. So how can we make this more attractive to women to be able to have them coming to this space?
I don't know that it was not attractive, and I'm not saying this, to make a boast. I'm just maybe using my own story as an example. I think sometimes it's also the lack of awareness, at levels where you can make a decision on a choice of a profession or a course to read. So for me, as an example, while growing up, what was put in front of me as an option, whether in school or at home, was sciences for sure, yes, but there was a larger inclination to medicine, because it felt more like, what a woman should do as opposed to engineering. So some of us who were very good in our sciences and math at the time were making choices of medicine over engineering. And so once we got into universities, you'd find that most of the ladies were either in medical courses than the engineering. And then even when you went to the engineering department, you probably just find one or two women out of a flood of men. I think really those decisions were informed by, their homes, their backgrounds, those that were fortunate to get early on mentors that geared or veered them towards that direction would definitely have made the choice of engineering. So I would say in summary, it's not because there is a lack of technical capacity to do those courses. It's really because of the lack of awareness. And once we start to inform and change that narrative to embrace, the fact that women can also actually aspire for those. And when women also start to see that, oh, there is even women representation in those courses as well, and there are senior people that I could even look up to that could be mentors and guides for me, I think it would naturally attract women to those, so that it then starts to change the perception, that those courses are not for women, when in fact women can easily excel, in them. And we do have, strong women now who are leading in those areas. We used to have a minister of technology who was a woman. We have country directors now in tech companies that are led by women. A good example as well is Ms. Funke Okweke, who's the founder of Main One. We have Juliet Human, who recently was in one of our panels, where she was discussing about our own representation as well in the engineering space. These are the encouraging stories that we need to spotlight. And as we start to raise those awareness, I bet you will be seeing more women in those areas.
Great stuff. I was also thinking along the political space. What about women in politics, governance? How well do you think government is taking that up, and how can we get better? I think we should be doing better than what we are doing according to the percentage that should be allocated. But I don't know. Is there any country meeting up with that at the moment? And if Nigeria is not, how can we get better? Do we have those that can fill into this space?
Oh, no, of course we do. Of course we do. And Nigeria has such a great story around women who have been part of politics, just running from Mrs. Ransom Kuti who was one of the people who spearheaded riots, or the women of Aba, or even some of the warriors that we had in the Dahomey Kingdom as well, that were women. We've had a portrayal of those stories even in recent films, in recent times. But what has happened over time is that, the course has changed. And then we've started to see that policies are not really favoring women to be part of, those discussions anymore. So what we really need to do is go back to the drawing board and change, some of those policies so that it's more attractive and make it a lot less difficult for women to be part of it. Because once you start to hear sometimes the gory stories in politics, you might find that women then stay back. But I guess it's really identifying the attractions in those areas as well, so women can be part of it. And we've seen that already in some of the wins that we had, during this season. The lady, I think it's Kinigbe in Abuja, who won a seat that had been previously occupied by three-time senator. That was very encouraging. And then you asked about countries. When you look at countries, there is a ranking that the Inter-Parliamentary Union does on countries. And it would interest you to know that Rwanda ranks first out of 196 countries in terms of percentage of women in parliament, where their women make up about 61.3%, of members in the lower house and 38.5% of members in the upper house. Sweden as well is a good example. And even the US as well, where we even have women as speakers in the House. We even have a woman as the vice president. So women are changing the narrative in other countries. And in Nigeria, we do need to do the same as well. We did see quite a number of participants in politics this year for women. And it's good when we have those, because then those are the people who can tell the stories from the lens of the women, which sometimes the men might miss. And then in terms of the policies that we then make, we will then have full representation from all the genders that are represented in the country. So we do need to start encouraging women. And I think it's something, like I said, that should start early on, so that we remove all of the bias that may be associated with women being in politics, remove the bias that's associated gradually with women doing STEM courses. And it's really about enlightenment, education, constant education. And of course, in shows like this, where we highlight the good that women do, celebrate them in those areas, and therefore start to see a change. Because of course, there are so many women that have natural activism in them. There are women who are introverts, but then you're being silent sometimes gives you the power of listening, and that listening ability also gives you the power to be able to make sound decisions that are very, very inclusive of those around you. So I think, yes, we started a journey. It's something that can be improved on, but we need to keep hammering on that so that it can be better.
Brilliant stuff, as usual. Now, let's talk about the challenges, because it sounds so interesting as we've been going on around this discussion. Even talking about the online issues or taking advantage of technology, we've had issues of online harassment of women. We've heard all of this, women facing an access even to internet. According to my research, UN is saying a number of millions of women have opportunities to get access to internet. Men have more opportunities than they do. So can we highlight some of those challenges and maybe possibly provide solutions?
So it would have been good to really study what you had, so that the solutions, speak to that. But I guess, from my perspective, I think there's a lot that, we can relate to in terms of financial inclusion, and then also the ability for women to get on the internet. I think it speaks to education. It speaks to the ability to be included from a financial perspective. Once you have a disparity there, it would tell in terms of the services that are onboarded to that part of society. And so that's where you probably might find a gap, your basic phone set, how are women able to connect to the internet? Do they have the wherewithal to do so? Do they have the understanding to do so? These are the things that can change, not because women are not interested in that, but maybe they don't even know about it. And sometimes when you go to the interlands in the rural areas as well. We find that these women are mostly occupied with taking care of the home and maybe are not necessarily interested, in being online because they don't feel the need to also digitize their small businesses, and they don't understand that there's an advantage to doing so. And so some of those is really around building the awareness for them to then connect into those platforms. Now, having said that, one of the things I spoke to was also, financial inclusion. One of the areas, I know you were talking about the Startup Act early, but, one of the challenges that we've also seen is just the bias that comes alongside getting funding. And overall, recently, PwC did an interesting thought leadership article where we interviewed quite a number of women, 40 women to be precise, across 25 countries. And we wanted to put a spotlight on some of the challenges that women-led startup funds are going through, women-led startup entities are going through when they start to look for funding, whether it's pre-seed funding to Series B funding. And some of the challenges relate to some of the bias that they experience as well when they go out to raise funding. And it was very interesting that, we found a story that dates back 2016 about a company that was looking to raise funding in Silicon Valley. And the challenge they had was they were just a two women-led group, and they couldn't get a lot of interest. Most of the inquiries were turned down. Well, guess what? They decided to add a man to their group, a fictitious man. And once they did, they got twice over many meetings than what they had when they didn't have a man. And, just judging from that experience, it was very obvious that, there is still that bias sometimes where some men don't take women seriously when it comes to raising funds. They don't spend the time to then look at the deals that are in front of them. And yet, in this case, the deal was a very attractive one. It's just the people that they were approaching, or the investors they were approaching, were blindsided because they thought these were just women who weren't bringing anything serious to the table. So in terms of that, we looked at that, and I think it's a very interesting piece that I would love everyone to read. We looked at that, and there were very critical recommendations that were coming through, from the women founders. They're just judging from their challenges, which is just being prepared and not being discouraged by the statistics. Because despite the fact that you have these statistics, we still have women that are making changes, positive changes in those areas. And some of the ways they are doing that is just learning not to accept no, learning to critically identify the right investors, if it's impact investment funds that you're looking to, which usually would be driven to making social impact. You definitely need to scout around and identify and match yourself to the right ones that can give you the right funding, so that you don't waste your time going to those that would not necessarily grant you those fundings until they find success, which is the beauty about funding. You may not then be able to see, a lot more variety in funding when you go up the ladder, whether it's your Series A or Series B. So in the pre-seed funding, learning not to focus on those kind of investors that are biased is critical, and trying to be more strategic in identifying the ones that will understand where you're coming from is also a good benefit. And staying true to yourself, just being original and learning to tell good stories was one thing that these female founders also shared with us. I feel it's a good way for women, to just start to embrace the fact that the statistics should not be the underlying, shouldn't be the reason why we then pull a step back. Another thing as well that was very critical and identified here was just knowing that there are allies around, that you can lean into. And those allies are not just the other gender or the opposite gender, but it's also the network of women, who have gone through that process and have fantastic advice and nuggets to give. So networks of women, business clubs, allies in men, sponsors, mentors, these are all areas and possible solutions to some of the challenges that we're facing. I think if we continue to grow that part, where we're raising awareness, like I said before, we will start to see changes. It may not come as fast as we want, but I think there is progress, especially even the fact that we're celebrating this day since over 1960s. Till now, we're still celebrating International Women's Day. It's a beauty to behold, and I love it.
Indeed, let me congratulate you again and wish you a happy International Women's Day. I must thank you for your brilliant contributions as usual. Esiri Agbeyi is a partner. She's with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Tolu. Have a great weekend.